Life stories. Subscribe to begin today's story. Have you ever felt like the forgotten one in your own family? Always overlooked. Always second place. No matter how hard you try? That was my life. My parents adored my younger sister, showering her with attention while my achievements went unnoticed. But what they didn't know was that, behind the scenes, I was quietly building a fortune. And when they finally discovered the truth, well, let's just say their reaction was unforgettable. Stay tuned as I share my journey of resilience, success, and the ultimate lesson in self-worth. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's story. When people ask me about my childhood, I usually change the subject. It's not that it was terrible. I had food on the table, a roof over my head. But let's just say it wasn't exactly a heartwarming, picture-perfect upbringing. My name is Lena. And at 32, I'm finally ready to tell my story. Not because I want sympathy, but because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it. I was 8 when my life changed completely. That was the year my sister, Emily, was born, 2 months premature. I still remember my dad rushing out in the middle of the night, his coat half buttoned, his eyes filled with fear. My Aunt Lisa arrived not long after, trying to distract me with soft reassurances and bedtime stories. But I could tell something was wrong. The house felt empty, like the silence itself was holding its breath. Emily survived. But she was fragile, so fragile that our home transformed overnight. It wasn't just a house anymore, it became part hospital, part fortress, designed to protect her from the invisible threats of the outside world. The scent of disinfectant became as familiar as the smell of dinner cooking. And Mom became obsessed with keeping everything sterile. Every surface cleaned, every door handle wiped down before being touched if I so much as sniffled. I was exiled. Lena, was that a cough? Mom's eyes would narrow with concern. Not for me. But for Emily. I don't think so, I'd say. But it didn't matter. We can't take any chances. Pack your bag, you're going to Grandma's for a few days. And just like that, I'd be sent away. Sometimes to Grandma's, sometimes to Aunt Lisa's. Like a problem to be removed before I could make things worse. It happened so often that I kept a small bag packed in my closet, ready to go at a moment's notice. At first, I told myself it was an adventure, a mini holiday. But after a while, I stopped pretending. It wasn't a vacation, it was exile. I learned early that if I wanted to be seen, I had to be perfect. So I threw myself into school, hoping that if I achieved enough, if I made them proud, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally look at me the way they looked at Emily. I got straight A's, joined the debate team, won a regional science fair. But every time I ran home, eager to share my victories, they barely noticed. Look, Mom, I won first place in the science fair, I'd say, holding up my trophy, my heart pounding with anticipation. That's nice. Sweetheart, did you wash your hands? Emily's been a bit sniffly today. My achievements were footnotes in the grand narrative of Emily's life. The worst part? When Emily turned 7, she suddenly stopped getting sick. It was like a switch flipped. And overnight, she was a perfectly healthy child. But Mom and Dad had spent so many years protecting her that they didn't know how to stop. And Emily, clever, observant Emily, figured out pretty quickly that playing the fragile card still got her everything she wanted. By the time I reached high school, I had perfected the art of blending into the background. I excelled in everything, on a roll. Extracurriculars, leadership positions, but in our house, Emily's drama always took center stage. I remember one parents' night in particular. My chemistry teacher, Mr. Peterson, had just finished telling Mom and Dad about my potential for a science scholarship. His face lit up with enthusiasm. And for the first time, I felt hope. Maybe this time, they would listen. Lena is one of our brightest students, Mr. Peterson said, beaming. She has a real future in. Before he could finish, Mom's phone rang. She answered immediately. What's wrong? Sweetie? Her voice softened. Her expression instantly clouded with worry through the speaker. I heard Emily's exaggerated sobs. I can't find my favorite pen for homework. The one Lena gave me is stupid, just like that. The conversation was over. My parents grabbed their things and rushed home to console Emily over a missing pen. I stood there, watching them disappear down the hall, my stomach sinking. Mr. Peterson gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder, murmuring something about how proud they must be. But I knew the truth after that. They stopped coming to my events altogether. It was easier that way, they said. No risk of Emily having a meltdown if they weren't around to distract her. I won the state debate championship that year. When I brought home the trophy, they didn't even put it on the mantle. Emily gets anxious when she sees other people's achievements, Mom explained. Tucking it away in a drawer. College acceptance day should have been the happiest day of my life. I had done it. I had secured a full-ride scholarship to a top university. Academic grants. The whole package. But when I shared the news at dinner, Emily barely looked up from her phone. Whatever, she said, rolling her eyes. At least now you can finally move out. I'm turning your room into my gaming paradise. My parents didn't argue. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't even ask where I'd be going that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that I had spent my whole life trying to be good enough for people who would never see me. For the first time, I let go of the hope that had kept me tethered to them. I was leaving. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. College was my escape, and I clung to it like a lifeline. The moment I stepped onto campus, I felt lighter, as if I had shed an invisible weight I had been carrying my whole life. For the first time, I was more than just Emily's sister. I was Lena, a person in her own right. I threw myself into my studies, determined to build a life where I would never have to depend on anyone. While my classmates partied on weekends, I spent mine in the library, my nose buried in textbooks, pushing myself to the limit. I worked part-time jobs, saved every penny, and made sure that when I graduated, I would be free, not just from my family's expectations, but from the financial chains that could pull me back at 23. Armed with my degree, I landed a job as a manager at Carter & West, a mid-sized firm that paid just enough for me to rent a tiny studio apartment and buy the occasional grocery store sushi. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My own space, my own rules. No Emily. No constant comparisons. No more fighting for scraps of attention. I should have been discouraged by the long hours and the mediocre salary. But instead, I felt like I had won the lottery. I was independent. And then, one lunch break, everything changed. I was scrolling through social media, mindlessly eating a prepackaged sandwich at my desk, when I saw an ad, "Learn to make your money work for you." Usually, I ignored those kinds of things. But something made me pause. I clicked on the link, read through the testimonials, and by the time my lunch break was over, I had signed up for the course. It wasn't cheap. In fact, it was a small fortune for someone on my salary. But I told myself it was an investment, one that might just change my life. The course was run by a man named David Grant, an investment strategist with a knack for making complex financial concepts sound simple. By the end of the first lesson, I was hooked. I studied market trends obsessively, reading everything I could get my hands on. I started small, putting a few $100s into promising tech stocks, then a few hundred more. I took advanced courses, learned about risk management and portfolio diversification. My first big win came from a little-known AI company that nobody was watching. I had invested $500. And within 3 months, it had grown to $5,000. The rush was unlike anything I had ever felt. Then came the biotech startup that tripled my money overnight before I knew it. My side hustle was making more than my actual job. One morning, I was sitting at my desk at Carter & West, pretending to care about quarterly reports, when my investment app pinged. Another stock had hit my target price. I did the math. I was making triple my salary, without even needing to be here that afternoon. I typed up my resignation letter and handed it to my boss. He blinked at me in surprise. Are you sure about this? Lena? You're one of our best managers, I smiled. I'm sure. And just like that, I walked away from the corporate world forever at first. I kept my new life a secret. I still attended our Saturday family dinners. Still nodded along as Mom and Dad droned on about Emily's latest accomplishments. The only difference was that while they were talking, my investment portfolio was growing quietly in the background. Lena, you're still at Carter and West, right? Mom would ask occasionally. Not really interested in the answer. Yep. Same job, I'd reply, watching as her attention drifted away before I even finished speaking. It was easier this way. No need to explain that I had quit 2 years ago. No need to tell them that I was making more money in a single day than I used to make in a month. Emily was still the star of every conversation. She had gotten into Kensington University, one of those elite schools where tuition costs more than a house. It's so expensive, Mom would sigh, her voice filled with pride. But Emily deserves the best education. We've taken out loans, of course, but it's worth it for our little girl's future. Emily would beam, twirling her pasta. My roommate has a Gucci backpack. Everyone there comes from such good families. The undertone was clear, unlike your family, Lena. Unlike you. Then one Saturday, I arrived to find Mom in tears. Dad was at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, his reading glasses perched on his nose. The property taxes went up again, he muttered. And with Emily's tuition, I watched them struggle, remembering all the times they had chosen Emily over me. And still, they were my parents. That night, I set up an automatic transfer, $11,000 a month to their account. When I told them about it, Mom actually hugged me. It was the first time in years she had shown me any real affection. Oh, Lena, this will help so much. For a brief moment, I thought things might change, that they might finally see me. But then, I overheard them in the kitchen after dinner. We should send some of Lena's money to Emily, Mom was saying. At least $300. The poor thing feels so out of place among all those wealthy students. Good idea, Dad agreed. She needs to keep up appearances. Maybe she can finally buy herself the designer bag she's been wanting. I stood there, just outside the doorway, listening to them plan how to spend my money on Emily's social climbing. I had given them a lifeline. And still, they chose her. I clenched my jaw, my hands curling into fists at my sides. They would never change. By the time I turned 29, I was ready for a change. My investment portfolio had grown beyond my wildest dreams, and I was tired of paying rent. After months of searching, I found the perfect apartment in a secure building with a breathtaking view of the city. It wasn't flashy, just clean lines, good bones, and enough space to feel like home. Best of all, I could buy it outright. No mortgage, no debt, no strings attached. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room, listening to my footsteps echo off the hardwood floors. This was mine, all mine. No one had given it to me. No one had sacrificed for me. I had built this life with my own hands. When Mom called later that evening, I casually mentioned I was moving. Did you find a cheaper rental? She asked, distracted, shuffling papers in the background. Just a different place, I said vaguely. Better location. Well, don't spend too much on rent, honey, she said without a second thought. You know how unstable the job market is for people in your position. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. If only she knew that my position involved managing millions in investments, not pushing papers at Carter and West at the next family gathering. Aunt Lisa asked about my new place. Oh, Lena's just renting a new apartment. Mom jumped in before I could answer. But wait until you hear about Emily's latest accomplishments. She's about to graduate from Kensington University, top of her class. The room erupted into excited chatter. Emily's going places, Dad announced proudly. Not that we're surprised. She's always been our achiever. Already has companies fighting over her. I sipped my wine, saying nothing, not that we're surprised. She's always been our achiever. It was funny. In a way, I had built a life of financial independence, created something for myself that most people only dreamed of. And yet in their eyes, I was still the one who settled for mediocrity. Then came Emily's graduation party. Mom and Dad went all out, catered food, expensive decorations, the works. I noticed they used some of the money I had sent them to pay for it. But whatever. I was used to it by now. Emily pranced around in her cap and gown, basking in the attention. When she spotted me by the punch bowl, she made a beeline over, her diploma clutched in her hands like a trophy. Look at this, Lena. She shoved it toward me. Kensington University. Not some state school like you went to. She smirked. I already have interviews lined up with top companies. I'm not going to end up pushing papers like you. I took a sip of punch. Congratulations, Emily, that's all you have to say? She laughed, tilting her head. Aren't you jealous? I mean, I'm going to be so successful. And you're just. Well, you. She stood there, practically vibrating with the need for me to acknowledge her superiority. I could have told her about my investments, about my fully paid apartment, about how I made more money before my morning coffee than she would make in her first year of work. But what was the point? I shrugged and walked away, leaving her standing there, diploma held high like a shield against her own insecurities. 3 months later, Emily was still unemployed. Those companies that were supposedly fighting over her? Turns out they weren't as impressed with her expensive degree as she thought. Meanwhile, the loan payments started rolling in. Then, one evening, Mom called. Lena, do you have a minute to talk? She asked, her voice softer than usual. I knew what was coming before she even said it. The loan payments for Emily's education. She paused, probably for dramatic effect. They're really crushing us, honey. And with all our other bills. I hate to ask, but could you possibly, how much do you need? I asked, already knowing I'd regret this. Well, if you could increase your monthly help to $2,000, that would be such a blessing. I thought about all the times they dismissed my achievements, all the times Emily had mocked my career, but I also thought about my bank account, comfortably sitting in the 7-figure range, an account my family knew nothing about. Okay, I said finally. I'll set up the new amount starting next month. Mom's thank you was barely out before she started planning how to spend it. This will help so much with Emily's loan payments, she gushed. And maybe we can help her buy some proper interview clothes. A few weeks later, Emily finally landed a job at the same company where Dad had gone to college with the HR director. The irony wasn't lost on me. One weekend, I stopped by their house and found Emily sprawled on the couch, scrolling through apartment listings on her phone. God, everything's so expensive, she whined. I can't believe I have to live here with Mom and Dad. This is so embarrassing. You could look at some smaller apartments, I suggested. Or maybe outside the city center? She looked at me like I had suggested she live in a dumpster. I need to be in the right neighborhood. Lena, she scoffed. Not that you'd understand. Some of us have standards. I glanced around at our parents' modest living room, where she was currently living rent-free, but kept my mouth shut. She tossed her phone aside dramatically. This is just temporary. Unlike you, I'm not going to be stuck as a manager forever. I have actual potential. I should have let it go. I really should have, but something inside me hardened. Let her believe what she wanted soon enough. She was going to learn the truth. Thanksgiving was the breaking point. Mom had injured her back, and for once, she wasn't able to handle the stress of cooking for the entire extended family. When she called me in a panic, I offered a simple solution: cater the meal from a high-end restaurant downtown. She was overjoyed, calling me a good daughter for the first time in years. But Emily wasn't pleased as we sat down for dinner. She made her usual sarcastic comments about how homemade stuffing is better than store-bought, and some people just throw money at problems instead of actually caring. I ignored her. I had gotten used to tuning her out. What I didn't expect was what happened next. I had left my laptop open in my old bedroom, keeping an eye on a few investments in the Asian markets. Emily must have seen it. She stormed back into the dining room, my laptop in her hands, smirking like she had just uncovered some grand conspiracy. "Let's see just how successful Lena really is," she announced. Flipping the screen around for everyone to see, the room went dead silent. My bank account balance was right there in front of them, $4 million. Emily's face turned pale. Mom gasped, clutching her chest. "You have $4 million?" she whispered. "And you've been letting us struggle?" That was it. The moment I finally saw them for who they really were, I walked out. Cutting them off for good. Some might call it cruel. I call it freedom. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more real-life tales.